Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to welcome you today to this webinar with leaders from the public and private sector in our region. Today, we will be launching a new publication entitled Gender Parity Initiatives in Latin America 2016-2022, a public-private partnership to boost equality. Reducing economic gender gaps in Latin America and the Caribbean is an imperative for reasons of equity and also because it is of the essence for a region's development and productivity. Let me give you a couple of data. A few decades ago, in the 1970s, 91% of lawyers in Mexico and 87% of physicians in Brazil were men. 40 years later, in 2010, the percentage of both professions had gone down to about 60%. Changes of this nature have also taken place in other occupations over the same period of time. If we think that the innate distribution of talent for these and other occupations is quite unlikely to have changed over time between the different genders, what we do know is that there was a great deal of talent in our region that was underutilized and that was not really fulfilling its potential and competitive advantages. The possibility of having more women in these occupations is correcting this bad distribution of talent and is so important for our region's development and productivity. Even today, we see that women make up a smaller share of the labor market than men, and the gap subsists. That is why in 2016, together with the World Economic Forum, we decided to convene leaders from the public and private sectors in the region to have a discussion and a platform for dialogue at the highest level to talk about gender gaps. And that is how Gender Parity Accelerators were created, and the French Development Agency joined these efforts in 2019. Many of those who are here may be familiar with the GPAs, or Gender Parity Accelerators, as we know them in English. However, many others might be wondering what they really are. Let me tell you about them because just give you some highlights. First of all, there are platforms that bring together and promote dialogue among sectors that sometimes don't talk to each other often enough and don't work together often enough, and that's the public and private sectors. It is also important to say that thanks to GPAs, high-level changes have been made within the participating organizations and also through public policy with the regional impact. GPAs have focused on three goals: increasing women's participation in the labor market, to close the gender gap, and increase the participation of women in leadership positions. Since 2016, 9 countries in the region have implemented these initiatives, and those are Chile, Panama, Argentina, Costa Rica, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Mexico, and Honduras, and that's in chronological order. Over the last 7 years since its implementation, the GPA's initiative has contributed to many results being achieved, such as the creation and dissemination of evidence on the magnitude of economic gender gaps in Latin American countries. Also, they have contributed to promoting changes in public policies and legislation, encouraging the commitment of private sector companies to and public sector players to close their gender gaps, and also to support the entry and advancement of women in non-traditional sectors, such as energy, mining, and construction. We have learned many lessons over the last few years of work. And this publication that we're launching today includes many of them. And the idea today is to work with and talk to some of the authors of this publication and those behind these initiatives to see how we can learn from them. On behalf of the IDB, I would like to thank all of the leaders of the governments and private companies who have placed their trust in us and have been our partners in these efforts by undertaking to promote changes which are much needed in the region. Unfortunately, we cannot have everybody involved here with us in this discussion. But I would also like to thank for the colleagues from the World Economic Forum and AFD for their work and cooperation. Now, in order to begin, I will turn it over to Maite Villanueva, Senior Specialist in the Gender and Diversity Division at the IDB, who has led on behalf of the IDB the implementation of these regional initiatives since its inception in 2016. Maite, together with Karina Lupica and Vivian Rosa, are the authors of this publication. Thank you so much for joining us, and Maite, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, Caridad, and good afternoon to one and all. Today, we're celebrating 7 years of efforts and working together with the public and private sector. And I would like to thank, just like everyone, and as Caridad was saying, we would have liked to have everyone, all of the leaders and colleagues who have been instrumental to attaining the goals that you will hear about now today. But we do have a top quality panel here who represent all of these regional efforts that we have moved forward with over the last 7 years. Let me introduce them. We have Maria Inés Castilla, Minister of Social Development of Panama, Richard Martinez, former Minister of Economy and Finance of Ecuador, and also former Vice President for Countries at the IDB, a matter of great pride for us. We have Felipe Montoya, Vice President for Human Resources at the Éxito Group in Colombia, and Celia Baller, Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the World Economic Forum. Thank you to all of you for joining us today. I want for you to be the protagonist today, so I will go straight into the questions. The first question is for Minister Castillo. Minister, you know that Panama was the third country to join in the GPAs in 2017 after Chile and Argentina. And I must say that although Argentina was first, Panama launched its initiative first and implemented its accelerator first. So what motivated your government to promote this initiative, this GPA, and what are the results that you feel you have achieved? Thank you, Minister. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you and this invitation. Without a doubt, it must be said that this initiative that began in Panama in 2018 is a state GPA, which seeks to close financial gender gaps. And why is it a state-promoted accelerator? It was created under an administration, and it continues on during our administration, under our administration, by strengthening the institutional framework and attaining better engagement by private businesses, NGOs, and government organizations and agencies. So most definitely, I must say that in this administration, what we feel that it's a top priority for the state to continue to lay the groundwork for the fight against poverty and inequality, and these GPAs are part of it, and that's how we have boosted this initiative. I must also say that for us, the main outcomes, aside from boosting the initiative, we're actually reaching almost the participation of over 100 companies plus government agencies and NGOs. All of this has enabled us to work on the sustainability of this GPA, but also to strengthen its operational and governance model. Moreover, when it comes to financial empowerment specifically, and as part of the National Council for Gender Parity, we continue to foster some major initiatives, such as the public policy to encourage and foster employability and social participation of women in vulnerable positions and in financial difficult financial situations, is also for the participation of young girls and young women in STEM careers, and also the strategy for women's empowerment, and also the EPIC national plan, which is under implementation, and the national plan for wage equality was also launched in 2017. And this Gender Parity Accelerator has been instrumental in implementing good practices towards gender parity in companies and in policy in general. And these actions and policies are not just permeating transnational companies, which have led this whole initiative, but also countries, domestic Panamanian countries, that are fully committed to bridging these gaps. And also, I must underscore that we have been working as coordinators of this GPA as part of the government to work with the private sector when it comes to care, and also in building a national care network. We have been working with the private sector as part of the GPA to move towards the creation of the system to strike a better work-life balance in our country, and also to foster some other initiatives that we've been working on together with the IDB to find different alternatives for care for children under 5 years of age, so as to improve coverage in care to small children in the private sector. So these are some of the points I wanted to mention. I know I don't have much time, only a couple of minutes, but the role of the GPA in closing these gaps and in coordinating the work by various sectors in closing that gap is of the essence, and that has been a priority for this administration. Thank you, Minister. I think you took more than 2 minutes because, as you said yourself, this has become a statewide initiative, and which has transcended the first administration. And the GPA in Panama is a factor that brings together several initiatives and several donors. So thank you very much for those words. Richard Martinez, now you are the first Minister of the Economy and Finance that requested support from the IDB to launch GPA, and that was in 2020. So what led you, as Minister of Finance, with so many important things on your agenda, what led you to request that support, and what have you achieved in your country through that GPA? Thank you, Maite, and greetings to the minister, the other panel members, and the audience, of course. I would like to say that there are several reasons. Some are more idealistic and some other are more pragmatic and having to do with the situation of the country back then. First of all, we had fertile ground. The road had already been paved. My team and I had been working with the private sector to push for the gender equality agenda, and we've been working with the IDB and the private sector. And in 2015, we created the award called Talent Has No Gender. That led to a more robust transformation agenda in the corporate world. During the assembly of the board of governors in Guayaquil, we also talked about that and pushed that forward. I was also on the World Bank's Council of Advisors for Gender Equality. So there were several elements there that could be leveraged and some prior experience. And then secondly, as you just said, COVID created major constraints, but also opened up new opportunities, because the gaps that were widened by COVID in terms of gender equality also showed us that there was an opportunity for us to move forward and grow faster. Let me give you some figures. Women make 15% less than men for the same job. They have 33% less access to decent jobs than men, and they only recovered part of the jobs that they had lost after the pandemic. So, and that's where the IDB was so vital. We had to grapple with the fiscal crisis, public debt, etc. The IDB became a strategic partner on which we could delegate these very important issues, and a reliable partner. We also had the Ministry of Production and also the Office of the President of the Republic that helped. And that led to more social and political stability. Gender equality helps get there per se, but we also felt that this initiative would help us open up the opportunities for dialogue and bring in stakeholders that were not around the table. And we also had to heal after some of the protests that we had due to some financial decisions that were made by the government in 2018. And we also had to position our country as a driver of reforms that would lead us to becoming more sustainable, and in terms of sustainable development. And so what are the outcomes? What are the achievements? Number one, we provided a formal structure to all of the ideas that were just not interconnected, and then that the 6 milestones on the roadmap of the initiative that we have are in a sequence and are interrelated. Secondly, a law on the purple economy was enacted with specific incentives for the promotion of greater participation of women and reducing the gender gap. And going back to the minister's message, which I feel is very important, this was enacted when I was no longer a minister. So it went beyond that administration, and there was a lot of polarization in Congress, but still there was the political will to enact this. And number three, this was included into the bank operations because Ecuador began to include gender issues in its financial strategies, and as part of the PBLs and technical cooperation projects. Thank you, Richard. I believe that goes to show the importance that economic and productive stakeholders in the countries work towards the advancement of women through the Women's Institute or women's agencies, because oftentimes these organizations end up working in isolation, and the importance it's important for the ministries of finance to put this at the center of the government programs, and that also contributes to the cross-cutting responsibility shared by all government agencies when it comes to women and the gender gap. Now, let's move to the private sector. Felipe, on behalf of the Éxito Group, which has been one of the champions in terms of participation, women's participation, and also active investment to close economic and financial gaps in Colombia in the private sector. So the same question for you. What motivated companies as large as the Éxito Group, which oftentimes are multinational companies and not national companies that undertake this, to commit to this? And what do you believe has been achieved through your efforts through the Colombian GPA? Thank you, Maite, for this opportunity and for inviting me. I'd like to go back to what has already been said, before me. In Colombia, there are still major gaps. In Colombia, it's 17%, the wage gap, and that's what we got through the GPA for Colombia. It must be said that the government, the public sector, should have initiatives as well, of course, but those are not sufficient. In order to provide adequate and safe work environments for men and women, we in the private sector need to buy into it and become engaged and committed so as to work together with the private and public sectors. We also believe that the private sector can work as a team, and in doing so, we can transform society. And we believe that women are key stakeholders in transforming our cities, our countries, and we must also remember that women need to become more and more empowered in their roles, not only at home, but also in companies. We must be more relevant, and we need to understand that we need to work with education and awareness raising in our companies and also in the communities where we work. I also believe and would like to express that when we work with a GPA, we are working to benefit the quality of life of all those working for a company and that are part of a society. And there is, that's very rewarding when we see the job stability and the fact that we retain people in our organizations and that they're committed. So when we work together with the private sector, the impact is very powerful for the country as a whole. In terms of achievements, let me say this. First of all, we have 36,000 staff members. We work with leadership, with climate, and I think that the best variable that we've had since we've been working with GPA is diversity and inclusion. Currently, we're over 90%. And that's the score that we get from all our staff members on average when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And on the outside, it becomes more and more visible that we have reached a great deal in terms of diversity and inclusion. We have better reputation in this area. It has gone from 72 to 97 points. So it's quite admirable to see how several stakeholders acknowledge a retail company based on their ongoing work with this GPA. And in closing, I'd like to say that we've been working with 82 vendors for some time with the GPA. We've been teaching them about good practices and the strategy and the opportunities that this will bring about. Thank you, Felipe. Without a doubt, what studies are telling us is that the savings and the benefits, tangible and intangible alike, that are attained by companies by attracting more diversity into their human talent and also retaining human talent, because the cost of losing qualified human capital is ever higher for companies. So thank you for your contribution. I will now switch to English.
So I would like to ask you what motivated the World Economic Forum to look for a partnership with the Inter-American Development Bank to work in these initiatives in Latin America and the Caribbean. And from your perspective, what you see as the achievements and lessons learned from this partnership and from the work that we've been doing in the region in the last years.
Thank you, Maite. And thank you so much to the IDB for the invitation and for this long-standing partnership. And many congratulations on this fantastic publication. This is clearly an excellent contribution to achieving scale on gender parity efforts at the corporate level, at the regional level, as well as at the global level. Now, you're asking about the motivation as to why the forum chose to enter into this partnership. And I would say there's really two parts to this. One, I think, is just the sheer size of the challenge that we're facing in terms of closing global gender gaps. And the second part is the belief that by combining our institutional strengths, we would be able to achieve real impact at the regional level as well as at the country level. Let me maybe say a couple of words as to how we see the challenge from the point of view of the analysis that we're doing at the World Economic Forum. Now, every year we issue the Global Gender Gap Report, and every year we calculate the number of years that we project that it will take to close the global gender gap. And I think in all the years that we have issued the report, we have never been below 3 generations of closing the gap. And in fact, after the crisis, we're now back to between 4 and 5 generations towards closing the gap. And if we look at the dimensions that we consider in the report, we're doing reasonably well on health as well as education, but where we see really persistent gaps are on the economic opportunity and participation piece, as well as the political empowerment piece. And so this is why we decided to focus the accelerators on this economic empowerment and opportunity piece. Now, when it comes to Latin America, we've seen very rapid progress in terms of closing gender gaps in the last few years. Latin America has actually across regions been moving at the fastest pace with only 53 years to close the gap left and is currently third in terms of the level of gender parity achieved. However, if we look at the relative sizes of the gaps, we see a similar pattern also in Latin America, whereby we're fairly close in terms of closing the gaps in terms of health and education, but similarly big gaps on the economic empowerment piece as well as the political empowerment piece. And I think when we entered into this partnership, there was a real sense that the World Economic Forum and the IDB together could create this change by leveraging the deep institutional knowledge of the IDB, the deep regional knowledge, the deep technical knowledge, as well as resources and financing, and combining that with the global platform that the World Economic Forum is able to provide on that, the public-private approach and mindset on this, as well as some of the benchmarking insights that we're able to provide. Now, in terms of the achievements, as it was already mentioned, we together have set up and are accompanying 9 accelerators since 2016, which is a fantastic success. And I think over the years, we have also been able together to improve and develop the model of the Gender Parity Accelerators further. And if there were some areas that I would highlight that have been really successful is for sure this public-private element that has been centered to all the accelerators. And I think we've already heard about some very successful collaborations there on the call. The Equirutas tool that Grupo Éxito and the Ministry of Labor of Colombia led together, which had some fantastic outcomes, as well as the Economía Violeta law that was passed in Ecuador, which was also a public-private effort. So the public-private piece really being core. And then secondly, this was also already mentioned, but I want to re-emphasize it here, is really the composition of the leadership group. The leadership groups are designed to bring together CEOs and on the government side, the ministries of women, the ministries that look after the social affairs with the ministries of economy and finance. And we feel that this mix of portfolios is really critical to the success of the accelerators. And this is something that we should be emphasizing going forward and really position gender parity as core to economic policy going forward.
Thank you so much, Celia. Yes, when we started in 2016, one of the questions that we were asked all the time is, why do you need such a high-level people in this group? Why ministers? Why CEOs? And I think that you've given a really good explanation about why this is important, because the influence that these leaders can have in terms of walking the talk, it's very important, as we will see in the next questions. I'm going to switch to Spanish now. Paso a la ministra Castillo, lamentablemente.
Now to Minister Castillo. Minister Castillo will have to leave us soon. She has a meeting. She has a prior engagement cabinet meeting. But thank you, Minister, for taking time from your busy schedule to spend with us. And she will be replaced by Naibe Farah. She is a gender specialist, and she is in charge of working with all of the initiatives and implementing them. Minister, would you like to say a few words before you leave? Thank you, Maite. Thank you for this opportunity and for inviting me. Before I give the floor to Naibe Farah, she is our director for the Gender Parity Initiative. And going back to the institutional framework, which is, it is very important for us to lay the foundations for gender parity to occur. In our region, there are many success stories, but others have not been able to progress for lack of a coordination mechanism. And with that in mind, we in Panama decided to go for a strategy to strengthen our institutions. Our GPA is GPA 2.0, that's what we call it, and which was supported by you and by the IDB and by McKinsey as well. This strategy has enabled us as a public interest association to work with the involvement of the highest government agencies at the highest level, but it doesn't just call for government will, but it also has an institutional framework to continue to exist over time, because closing the gender gap is a priority and it must continue to be so for our country.
So thank you very much. I have to go to my cabinet meeting and I will leave you in good hands. Welcome, Naive. What we would like to do is for you to go a little deeper into what the minister was saying in terms that Panama was the first country that took this decision for this initiative to become a council for gender parity. So I'd like you to tell us how you've seen this decision for the creation of this council. Do you think this is of a critical importance and in terms of its sustainability? And secondly, what do you see coming? I know that we've spoken about GPA 2.0, but I know that you have 2 minutes, but tell us what this means for you in Panama. Thank you so much, Maite. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. The council has been of vital importance in order to guarantee that sustainability throughout the country. This happened in 2008 after a diagnosis that was done, which pointed out that throughout the country and all the region, we had various challenges that could not be taken on only by one actor. Rather, this work required an interinstitutional and interactor cooperation. This is why this council is presided over by Minister Marines Castillo, who heads social development, as well as other institutions of the country. We should mention the Ministry for Women, the Ministry for the Treasury, for Economics and Finance, the small and medium-sized industries, the National Ministry for Science and Technology, amongst others, so that we have a very robust representation by the state as well as the participation of the private sector. These were the pioneer companies that committed to gender equality in the country. Something very important within all of this is the National Council for Gender Parity was created through a presidential decree. Its main objective is to make sure that there is an extension, appropriation, and sustainability of this initiative to improve the economic situation of women in Panama. So through this decree, this presidential decree, we have multiple institutions, the private sector, so that they can cooperate in a country plan with an action plan with 12 measures, which is a manner to structure and coordinate all of the institutions. What is coming, which is GPA 2.0, which our minister mentioned a few minutes ago, is that we've had from the previous administration, for this administration, it's been very important to promote gender parity, but it's important to make sure that this initiative is solid, to create it as an entity. It has to have a legal status as well. And so we see that we have the cooperation between state institutions as well as private industry. This has been very important. It's been a 2-year job. We've been working on this in order to guarantee its financial sustainability, how to make sure that it has legal standing. We have to make sure that there is specialized people, personnel who can move forward with all of these initiatives, working with work groups amongst all the people that are part of this initiative, and for them to contribute toward the creation of a best practices community, because the best way to move forward is to see what others are doing, and at the same time having emblematic projects that allow us to fulfill our action plan. This GPA 2.0, therefore, is a strengthened GPA, a management system, a management model that includes all of the expectations of the different parties involved, where we have staff that is specialized and where we have worked together to make sure that both from the governance as well as the administrative strands, we are doing our work properly. Thank you so much. This is an important way to move forward and to receive financing and resources from the private as well as the public sector in order to maintain that wide reaching initiative. Thank you. Now I'd like to go back to Richard. You not only were the first minister for finance and the economy in order to request the support of the bank and the forum, as well as the French development agency. What you did was that you made sure that this initiative would be part of an important matrix of policies, of an important program that was based on policies supporting Ecuador after the COVID crisis. We know that these programs basically provide budgetary support so that we can recognize and motivate governments so that they can implement certain policies that are important for the inclusive development within their country. Therefore, we'd like you to tell us a little bit about what motivated you to say, very well, we're not only going to promote all this, but the establishment of this initiative is going to be one of the conditions for that program, for that matrix, and for you to tell us what we should promote further so that other ministers of the economy and finances in this region are able to promote this type of gender policies within their country. I think that it's important to understand in relation to your question, the role which is that of finance ministers being the leaders of this type of initiative. So I think that if finance ministers are at the helm of all this, I believe that it's much more feasible that these topics are taken on with greater energy within the planning, the general planning in the country, and that they might have better traction in terms of the policies. So the chance of you having better results is therefore higher, that the decisions that are made are sustainable long-term, and the chances of you being able to have greater scalability within these initiatives, not only in the country, but within the entire region, is even higher. So it's important to do this projection from the various treasuries. You were asking us, well, what motivate us? What would motivate us? So it's the work that we were fulfilling. We thought that we could contribute between all the complexities that we had, putting all of this forward so that we could have multilateral joint work as an instrument that allows us to revert a trend, a social trend, which is associated to gender parity. And on the other hand, having as a country access to the financing, which was not that much in the market. We were having quite a bit of problems in Ecuador. We had a very high external debt. I was telling you about the finance ministers, Maite, because I think that the finance ministries, and particularly those ministers, have the ability to integrate the entire concept as well as the gender parity concepts in a number of policies, in taxation, in the job market. And this allows us to have a wide-reaching focus, which could be much more effective than having isolated initiatives. Secondly, I believe that it's a clear signal for the private sector. And we have spoken here about the importance of the private sector being involved. And at the same time, we have many companies that have this on their agenda. At the same time, there are other companies that are waiting for the signals that are sent out by the government. So I believe that the Treasury is the one that brings together these initiatives. And if they convene all of these initiatives, this could lead to greater traction. In terms of the international sphere, we have to complement all this with the development of new markets. Why? Because we thought at the time that the financing that reaches the government is important, but we were also thinking about the type of doors that we will open for the private section with thematic bonds, with the agenda that we were working on. This is coming together. It's work that will have very substantial effects long term. And I also believe that there are a couple of things that are important if Treasury ministers are involved. First of all, this has to do with structural reform. Finance ministers typically have the obligation to process structural reforms, and these reforms have to include gender parity topics, because obviously there are reforms in much more complex fields. We're talking about taxation and so on. But if you include gender here, you can find a better balance, a much more assertive discourse. And secondly, if there are topics that come directly from the Treasury towards the Congress, toward the various assemblies in the countries, of course, this will lead to greater traction for the exchange, the discussion. I also believe that this increases the credibility of this type of initiative due to the fact that you avoid these initiatives being seen as marginal things. Oh, this comes from this ministry. This is something that does not regard us. On the contrary, if the finance ministry comes in, the treasury comes in, then I believe that this is going to create greater traction. And many times when the treasury comes in with these initiatives, it sends its delegates. I think it's a very good opportunity. This is something that can be done, and many other countries have proven that it can be done, but I believe that this participation is important. The last topic, which is key, is the pressures, peer pressure, so that we can generate scale. If you look at the finance ministry that is advocating for gender equality, this is going to influence his or her colleagues in other countries, and it's going to bring a greater change. I believe that in the experience of Ecuador, it was a ministry budget. I was having this conversation with various groups. If it is a finance minister, well, they were saying, well, we need more men at the helm of these initiatives so that we can bring together a greater conscience. And so the minister in this case was a man. So you were saying, so what is the next step? And I would like to close with this. I believe that the next step from the multilateral perspective and the bank's perspective is to have more and more ministries and treasuries, men and women, of course, because I believe that the bank has had quite a bit of experience from regional platforms. I like the platform of the Treasury ministries coming together due to climate change. And this allows us to bring in solutions, concepts, building them from the perspective of Latin America and the Caribbean in order to provide our position in terms of global problems. I believe that the bank can be the catalyst to bring all of the ministries together. It would be very nice to have a platform of these ministers that are committed to gender parity with the participation of the private sector. Yes, thank you so much, Richard. I believe definitely that the fact that you were a man, you were a minister who was involved with these topics is going to have a very important impact. Of course, women are important as well, but I believe that this is going to have a greater impact. You were talking about crucial words, scalability, traction, and so on. We have to keep this in mind in order to have the structural reforms that are necessary and the diversity that we are pursuing. Another topic that was mentioned, and I believe that it's very important in terms of the private sector, is the concept of incentives. I don't think that we have spoken sufficiently about the incentives that governments could provide the private sector so that these in turn are able to implement more policies, more inclusion programs within their companies. Again, I would like to go to Felipe Montoya because I believe that Éxito decided to invest in the development of a tool which we call Equiruta, which is inspired, and it allows the bank to create a toolkit that we will launch for the private sector so that the companies know what tools are available in order to implement inclusion policies in their companies. Did you want to use these tools? And we understand that your intention was to make sure that your companies were committed to all this in the value chain. What is your motivation? Why would you make these investments? What are the incentives that you believe are important for your companies that are part of this value chain, not within these companies, but in the private sector in Colombia in general? Yes, this is important because this has taken us to a strategy that was very powerful when we accepted this challenge. We were absolutely convinced that we could contribute something very important to this, to society in a permanent way with the tools that I will explain to you. I believe that we have been working very hard in recruitment, training, the social and sexual harassment, excuse me, and particularly everything that has to do with inclusion and reconciliation. This platform that was built with our team for the topics of diversity and inclusion is a platform that we have been offering free of charge for all the providers that wish to use it. And basically, it's a roadmap with 10 steps that will provide guidance to the institutions, to all those that adhere to GPA. It's quite simple, but it's a facilitator. It provides a roadmap so that we can improve the GPA indicators. It also is an important repository with diagnostic instruments, training programs, and if we follow all this by the companies especially, this will allow them to accelerate their action plan through referencing, not only through the tools that we provide them, but being in touch with companies that have been using this toolkit itself, and then decide to make the decision to go along this route. I believe that the fact that we have shared this toolkit has led us to create a solid relationship within the different actors in the value chain. There's a wider community that is working jointly in the topic of parity. And I also believe that this has created some wonderful spaces where we have exchanges, we have discussions, we talk about synergies, best practices, how all of the various organizations can promote a culture whereby men and women are on equal footing and they have the same opportunities. In particular, we have 82 companies in Colombia that are participating in this program called Equirutas, the Equal Routes. And we talk about talking about We're talking about working with their talent groups, compensation, labor, the labor market and labor agreements. So I believe that this is a very powerful example. And I have to say that this has been the toolkit that has led to all these advancements. As you can see, we've given much importance to this, and we've made sure that other companies joined the APG. Thank you. Thank you so much, Felipe. I believe that something which is very important is the fact that there is an agenda which is still pending for 2.0. What are the incentives that we can generate both from the public and private sectors for companies to use these tools? How can they certify them? How can we privilege this from companies that use this certification? And again, I would like to move to English.
The World Economic Forum to have a more global perspective with different type of accelerators that you have implemented. So I would like to ask you, based on what you've been learning, not only in the region, but also in the world, what are the challenges and the opportunities that you see in terms of like different panelists have talked about sustainability. How do you see the sustainability and the expansion of these initiatives? What do you think needs to happen, and where the forum is going with this partnership all over the world that you have to promote these accelerators?
Yes, I think as we're looking into the future and thinking through options for how we can expand the work, I think it's really important to keep in mind the current context. Gender parity across the world has been slipping down the list of priorities of issues to be solved in the middle of all the ongoing crises that we're seeing globally. We're also, of course, in the longer term in the midst of this deep technological transformation and the green transformation. And we feel that in general, women's voices aren't sufficiently being heard when it comes to strategic decision making, when it comes to innovation processes in the workforce, as well as consumers. So with that in mind, I think there's three areas that we have identified in terms of a strategic focus for the gender parity work going forward globally. One of them is around labor force participation. We saw during the crisis that there was a massive deterioration in the gender gap when it comes to labor force participation. Of course, a big underlying factor to that was the breakdown of the care economy. But also outside of this, looking at this from a longer term perspective and a non-crisis perspective, we feel that building a functioning care economy will be absolutely critical. Not only to gender parity, but it's currently acting as a constraint on growth, basically. There are many resources that aren't being used to the full potential, and we feel that investing in the care economy, both on the public side and the private side, is going to make a real difference. And of course, there are many countries in Latin America who are leading the way on this, and many accelerators in Latin America are already focusing on the care economy and are leading the way on this particular topic. A second piece is representation in senior leadership, where we continue to see across the world, across industries, what we're calling in the report the drop to the top. So this the phenomenon that we have fairly high representation at entry levels, but as you move across the hierarchies, representation of women drops all the way up to C-suite. And while we did see a positive trend in terms of the number of women that are being hired into senior leadership positions, the data from 2022 shows that there's actually a downturn in this hiring rate. And we also saw, of course, some very high profile women stepping back from political leadership positions. So we feel that there is a risk of a potential downturn in this trend, in what was initially a positive trend. And then the third piece is representation of women in the occupations of the future and in the growing industries. Now, according to our Future of Jobs report, we're expecting almost 25% of job churn in the next 5 years, which is tremendous. And when it comes to a gender parity perspective, that's not necessarily working in women's favor. So a lot of the roles that are projected to be declining are employing large numbers of women. And for the jobs that are increasing, we don't necessarily have the pipelines for women to step into those positions. And of course, a big part of that is STEM. So one of the things that we feel needs more focus is closing gender gaps in STEM, all the way from the entry level, from general workforce representation into representation and leadership. In all of this, public-private collaboration will be as important as ever, if not more important. So challenges such as new skills requirements, the job displacements that we're seeing, planning for the jobs of the future, building the care economy, building functioning care systems, all of this will require very close collaboration between the public and private sector. And I think we need to continue emphasizing the economic case and continue to bringing in the ministers of economy, the ministers of finance, and the CEOs who have really made gender parity core to their business strategy.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Celia. We have less than 5 minutes to finish this very, very interesting panel. And I would like to start with you, Celia, to close this event in less than like 30 seconds. If you could tell us like one phrase that you would like all the participants to remain about the importance of these initiatives or the challenges of these initiatives, what would that phrase be?
I think in terms of some very concrete achievements, the report will be an excellent source to go to. I think overall, I would say it's important to keep in mind all the different levels at which the gender parity accelerators are having an effect, whether that's at the individual level, it's at the community level, it's at the economy-wide level. So there are so many ways in which these accelerators are transforming lives. And yeah, we should keep all those levels in mind.
Thank you. Felipe, paso al español. Una frase que tú quieras dejar a la audiencia.
A sentence that you would like to leave with the public, with the audience. I think that we have to make sure that our aim is to provide all kinds of opportunities to Colombia. And I think that this is going to be a great accelerator for women in general. Richard, first of all, congratulations for this publication. I had forgotten to congratulate you. I think that it's excellent. But the most important thing here is that we see that there is a change in society's paradigm. These are things that are moving forward and they're irreversible. They won't move, they won't go back. So of course, we're talking about greater equity, we're talking about justice, but we're also talking about a greater growth. I would say that this sentence should be this change in the paradigm, and we should push forward this agenda. Naive, I believe that all of us have mentioned this. This requires cooperation. All of us have to work jointly, both the private as well as the public sector. Women all over the world have to be able to have greater access, and this is an important initiative. There has to be a greater interest by companies, so let's transform the world together. Thank you so much. And if there is a sentence that I wish to use is that we do leave our mark. We have to be sure that we're working together with the French Agency for Development, the World Economic Forum, and the IDB. I think that it's of critical importance to continue with this platform of being able to promote new these opportunities for women to be able to become part of our economy and be part of our workforce. Thank you so much. Thank you to the IDB for this event, and thank you for the publication. I hope you all have a good evening and afternoon.